All right, everybody. I've had a lot of people blowing up my phone asking me about the election results, specifically, obviously, New York City, New Jersey, Virginia. A lot of questions specifically about Virginia, since I'm still currently in the Virginia House of Delegates, but I was not seeking reelection, so I'm not going back next year. Wasn't involved as a candidate in this year's elections, but obviously across the board, not a great night for conservatives. We saw in Virginia, clean sweep of governor, attorney general, lieutenant governor. You also saw, I think it's a 13-seat pickup now in the Virginia House of Delegates thus far. And New Jersey, obviously things didn't go well with the gubernatorial election. And then New York City has elected both an Islamist and a communist as their mayor. So I'm sure that's going to go swimmingly. I don't think too many people were shocked about some of the other results, with California and their ballot referendum. So again, what we're going to do tonight, or excuse me, do right now, is I'm going to give you some of my thoughts about what can actually be done about all of this, and be happy to take some of your questions, especially specifically about Virginia and probably Mamdani. Those are the two. Those are the two that I know something about. Let's start with Virginia. So again, my home state. Pretty decisive victory by the Democrats, right? And one of the things I want people to understand here is that I tend to be a pretty optimistic guy. So I'm always looking for the bright side. I'm always looking for how do we find the silver lining. But I think it's important that we understand that if you're not honestly assessing what's going on, if you're not properly diagnosing the problem, then you really don't get to expect that you're gonna be able to fix it anytime soon. So let's talk a little bit about Virginia. Obviously, when this whole race started off, the pundits and everyone else thought that Winsome Sears was going to lose to Abigail Spanberger. They thought that John Reed was probably going to lose to Hashmi, and they thought that if any of the races was going to be the closest, it would be Jason Marius against Jay Jones. And that ended up being reflected ultimately in what happened on election night. There was a lot of people who were skeptical of Winsome Sears and her chances of winning in Virginia. Some people thought she was too conservative. Some people thought that her campaign wasn't run well, or that some of her messaging was a problem. Here's what I'm going to say right up front. I think there's all sorts of things that we can look at on what could individual candidates have done better, campaigns have done better. But I also think we need to be realistic about the outcomes. I saw somebody who's familiar with Virginia politics going, if only Jason Marius had been our candidate, he would be governor-elect right now. I don't believe that's true. And I say that as someone who thought that Jason ran a very good and disciplined campaign. And the other thing to keep in mind when I talk about all these people is I know them all. Like Winsome's a friend, Jason's a friend. I've been on John's radio show several times. When you look at the other people on the other side of it, I also know them very well. A lot of people are looking at these comments and saying, Spanberger's this or Spanberger's that. Jay Jones is this. I know these people. I'm not confused about who they are, what they believe, what they do, how they run, how they vote, any of it. And while I'm sure it's fine and we should be introspective about what happened with respect to Republican candidates and Republican campaigns, can we just cut the crap for a second? Republican voters didn't show up in Virginia. And whenever we do this, it's like, oh, you can't blame the voter. You got to give them something to vote for. Okay, fair enough. But I do think the Democrats did a really good job of giving us something that we should vote against. The same amount of voters that showed up for previous Republican candidates stayed home for a lot of these other candidates. Not to mention the fact that Democrats had some seriously flawed candidates. Hashmi refused to debate John Reed, would not debate him. For people that are always talking about transparency and everything else, the fact that she would refuse to debate is pretty significant. Abigail Spanberger, there's videos leaking of her after Charlie Kirk is murdered, running around the Commonwealth of Virginia telling her supporters to let their rage fuel them. Again, that's problematic. Not to mention the fact that she had supporters standing up at a rally, and I believe it was Arlington, where a white liberal woman holds up a sign that says, Winsome, if trans can't use your bathrooms, then blacks can't use our water fountains. She held a sign. She was told, hey, I don't know if this the sign's gaining a lot of attention on social media, and she just kind of shrugged it off because again, she didn't see any problem with a white liberal woman saw no problem with telling what could have been the first Black female immigrant governor in America that, yeah, you don't get to use my water fountain if you don't allow boys to use girls' bathrooms. So there was some problems with Abigail Spanberger's campaign and things she had to answer for. And then, of course, there was Jay Jones. There was Jay Jones, the leaked text messages revealing not so much that he had said, if I had Pol Pot, Pol Pot, Hitler, and Todd Gilbert in a room, and I had 2 bullets, he would shoot Todd Gilbert twice. Now that's bad enough, but one might have looked at that and said, yeah, I remember Michael Scott making a similar joke on The Office. It's a colloquial joke, and maybe it's dark humor, but it shouldn't be taken that seriously. No, what should be taken seriously is that he went on to fantasize about Todd Gilbert's children dying in their mother's arms in order to change Todd's mind about political policy. And then when he got called on it, doubling down in a phone conversation with a colleague saying, well, no, this is what I think. Sometimes this is what it takes. And again, it's not just that was bad enough in and of itself. It's that this guy was running for the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And he said this, and it had very little impact on voters in general. And it had almost zero impact on Democrat voters. And on top of all of that, the House of Delegates, we needed 2 seats. We needed 2 seats in the House of Delegates to stop a lot of the nonsense that is going on. And instead, Democrats picked up, I believe it was 13. I think it's 13 at this point. So I think we need to understand that, again, something's pretty bad is going on here in Virginia. And now I have a lot of people going, what can be done? And I'm looking at them going, well, you can win elections, but that didn't happen, did it? And so now I think we need to understand what's going to happen next in Virginia. What's going to happen next in Virginia is Speaker Don Scott and Senator Louise Lucas are essentially going to run the General Assembly and the Virginia budget as something of their piggy banks. What's going to end up happening is there's going to be a list. They're going to go through a list and they're going to look at every major industry, company, or whatnot that voted, that either donated to Republicans or failed to donate sufficiently to them. And I guarantee you those companies, their lobbyists are calling them up right now going, you need to cut a check to Don Scott's PAC, to Louise Lucas's PAC ASAP. Because there is going to be a whole host of tax and regulatory policy coming down the pike during the next General Assembly session. And if they don't see you in a good light, you're not going to get any seat at the table, right? You're just going to get railroaded with regulations, taxes, labor stuff, et cetera. So the reason why that's important is because understand that whether we like it or not, fundraising is a big part of winning elections. And the message that's about to be sent to any industry in Virginia that traditionally has donated to Republicans is doing that is a very bad idea for you, because the tax code and the regulatory policy will reflect. Now, they're going to raise taxes and they're going to make new regulations regardless, right? Because there's portions of their coalition that are depending on this, either in the form of subsidies, welfare checks, or just powerful interests or lobbies that did their part to deliver an overwhelming victory, and now they expect to be taken care of on the other side of it. And this is also important to understand that this is how leftism views government, right? The Democratic Party has adopted something of a critical theory view of society, and critical theory essentially says that everybody can be bifurcated into oppressors and oppressed, right? And if you're an oppressed, well, then you need to be liberated. And the Democrats are here to fight for you. And if you're an oppressor, well, clearly you need to be punished. The problem is what constitutes being an oppressor? Well, again, in the critical theory worldview, when they look at any disparity among people or groups, there's this automatic assumption that it's some sort of evil, corrupt power structure that has achieved that. Because, of course, left to all of our devices, we would achieve relatively similar end states. Now, we may think that's absurd, but they don't. And so the end result is that they are now going to use government to wield power in order to reward their friends and punish their enemies. And that sounds a little draconian, but if your friends are the oppressed and your enemies are the oppressors, well, then you have all the moral justification you need in order to use government in order to achieve those sorts of ends. And I think that's the thing that we need to recognize about the mindset that is kind of taken over at this point. And so the end result is that whether it's companies that donated, whether it's individuals that they want to target, when they start looking at the policies and the legislation that they're going to implement, they're not just going to implement it in accordance with their very clearly stated ideological viewpoints. They're also going to implement it with the mindset of consolidating and expanding their power base. And that's done by two ways. One, it's increasing the number of people that are dependent upon you being in power in order to either get a check, get a subsidy, get special dispensation and regulations, whatever it is. And it's about punishing the people that have not properly supported you in the past, so that at the very least, they remain silent. The other thing that you can expect is when it comes to, and I'll go through the list here. One of the common questions I get asked is, what is this going to mean for gun policy in Virginia? Well, again, we don't have to be curious about this. 4 years ago, when the Democrats controlled everything, they attempted to actually drop legislation that, when it was originally drafted, included gun confiscation and would have made you a felon for owning a whole host of firearms that it's perfectly legal to own in the Commonwealth of Virginia currently. Not to mention the fact that they also would have made it a felony to own a high capacity magazine, which I believe at that time was anything more than 10 rounds. I think that's what they landed on. Now, a lot of that got adjusted. They started saying, okay, we'll grandfather in the current weapons, or we'll come up with a buyback program or whatnot. But the bottom line is there was such a tremendous backlash within the Commonwealth of Virginia that Democrats killed that bill, recognizing that it could cost them in the next election cycle. They're not going to go into this election. So they're not going to go into this next legislative session with that mindset. So what you're going to see is gun legislation in Virginia, which probably closely mirrors things which have passed muster in the courts in places like California, Chicago, New York. So just expect it. Dan Helmer's probably going to be the guy that carries the legislation. Marcus Simon's probably going to chair the committee for which the legislation will be heard. It's going to fly through the House, fly through the Senate. Abigail Spanberger, who likes to tell everybody how, oh no, I'm fine with guns, I was a law enforcement officer, is going to sign these bans with an absolute smile on her face. So for any of you that might have been tricked into thinking that, well, she doesn't really pose a threat to your gun rights, forget it. The only thing that they might pull back a little on at this point is they will come back and they'll say, okay, we're not going to go to gun confiscation levels. We'll just go to probably something like grandfather clause in the current ones, no more sale of, and again, when they say assault rifle, they mean a semi-automatic rifle with a pistol grip. That's an assault rifle to them. Doesn't even have to be an AR-15 or anything like that. So you're going to see that with gun policy. When it comes to energy policy, energy bills are already going through the roof in Virginia, and there's two reasons for that. At the same time that Democrats passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which basically said that we had to produce a lot more green energy, generally in the form of solar panels or wind. They also allowed more data centers to move in because they saw it as being good for generating tax revenue without having to create additional services. The problem is that it consumes a lot more energy. And the reason why they haven't been able to get as many solar farms as they want is because a lot of the local jurisdictions in rural areas that don't want to see all of their farmland or forests get cut down for solar fields have basically held up the process and said, no, we're not going to approve these. Well, I promise you right now, there's going to be a major push in the General Assembly to strip localities away of some of these land use authorities when it comes to things like green energy. And so they're going to push more the green energy piece. It's not going to meet all of our energy requirements. It is going to cause your bills to go up, but you're not going to be able to do much. You're not going to be able to do much about it. When it comes to taxes, you're going to see selective taxes increases. Of course, they're going to claim to tax the rich, but in reality, what they're going to do is they're going to tax employers, right? They're going to tax businesses that are employing people, and that's going to have negative effects and impacts on job opportunities and economic opportunities. They're going to probably fast track raising the minimum wage. This will be interesting to see because they want to raise it across the board, but this will be one of those areas where you can see Don Scott or Louise Lucas taking aside certain industries and saying, hey, we'll give you special carve-outs, but there needs to be something on the other end of that. And so what you might see in environments like that is Something like you saw with Panera in California, where all fast food has to have increased their minimum wage to $20 an hour. Oh, unless of course you bake bread on site. Why is that essential? Well, it's essential because Panera donated a lot to Gavin Newsom. Don't be shocked if you see similar arrangements in Virginia. Not saying it's going to happen, but don't be shocked if you actually see it. The other thing that you're going to see taking place with respect to taxes is you're going to see, quote, tax cuts for those who need it the most. And when they say that, what they mean is tax cuts for people who are not who are not net taxpayers. So essentially, it's just government subsidies. It's just going to be more money going into those particular areas. When it comes to building or affordable housing, you're probably going to see a lot more government money going towards subsidizing, quote, affordable housing, but you're also going to see a whole lot of restrictions on it, which makes it really expensive. So at the same time that they're going to use your tax dollars to subsidize housing for people, they're going to create more regulations. They're going to create more regulations around what sort of labor you can use. And the end result is the price is going to go up, so the subsidies won't cover as much, and you're still going to have problems. They're also going to continue to pass regulations with respect to what renters can do. And so they're going to make it far more expensive and risky to actually rent your property to people that want to. And so that's also going to have negative effects as well. And everything I'm talking about here, by the way, this isn't just random speculation. You can go look at the legislation that they carried the last several years. And the only reason it didn't go into effect is because Governor Youngkin vetoed it. The only reason why some of it might not go into effect next year is if certain industries lobby well enough, and by that I mean pay the right people enough to get either special carve-outs for their particular industry or company, or some other subsidy in order to make up for it. Another thing you're going to see on healthcare. I mean, the bottom line is that they want to see more government intervention within healthcare, and so you're going to see the roles of things like Medicare and Medicaid probably go up significantly. The problem is that there's not enough money to pay for all of it, and so it's got to come from somewhere. And healthcare costs in the Commonwealth of Virginia have already surpassed, I believe, education is the number one line item in the budget, and so you're going to see problems there. When it comes to education, expect to crack down on homeschooling. They're probably going to try to get rid of religious exemption, and over time, you're probably going to see them looking for more government oversight onto homeschooling because they see that as a threat. So there will be crackdowns on homeschooling. Anything with respect to kind of the woke nonsense that we thought was on its way out, you're going to see come raging back into the Virginia higher education system and within our public schools as well. They're going to say, here's going to be the workaround. They're going to say that that they're not changing anything, that the Virginia Constitution allows the locality to make the decisions that they want with respect to policies. But then what's going to happen is you're going to see executive orders out of the governor's office. You're probably going to see legislation on the state level requiring certain things. And then what they'll do is they'll tell the local jurisdiction, well, yeah, if you don't do this, you're going to potentially face a lawsuit, or you're going to potentially lose funds. And so what will end up happening is local school boards, even if they don't like some of these policies, will say, I don't want to get sued and I don't want to lose funds. And so they'll comply with them. And that's essentially what's going to happen with a lot of your local school districts. I'm trying to think if there's anything I've left out so far that I really wanted to hit on here. The other thing too is get ready for the Attorney General's. The Attorney General's office under Jason Miyares was really focused on things like illegal immigration, child human trafficking. It was focused on really doing like law and order stuff, basic law and order crime stuff. The Attorney General's office under Jay Jones is going to be the activist wing of the Democratic Party. That's not to say they won't prosecute any crimes, but Jay Jones was famous when he was in the state legislature for voting for pretty much every bill that gave things like earned sentence credits that let felons out of jail early, to include violent felons, to include people that got out and then reoffended and were rearrested. So don't expect an Attorney General's office that's going to be aggressive in enforcing the law. Look at an Attorney General's office that's going to look for ways to sue the Trump administration, that's going to try to obstruct in any way they possibly can with enforcing of immigration laws. Look for a lot of the localities or Commonwealth attorneys that have previously kind of been put on notice. They're going to go full bore on actively, probably in more ways than not, obstructing ICE and whatnot when it comes to enforcing immigration law, right? Localities have no obligation to enforce immigration law, but they're not allowed to obstruct it. But there's a lot of things they can get away with in a gray area that will essentially make it very hard for ICE to do their job. I mean, to give you an idea for this, Speaker Don Scott in the House of Delegates set the record this year with the most bills that did not get a hearing. Typically in the General Assembly, 5 to 10 bills a year might not get a hearing. Under Don Scott's leadership, 120 Republican bills never got a hearing. And that included things like dealing with human trafficking. It included things like, not allowing the school system to trans your child without your knowledge. It included things like a repealing of sentence credits for the most violent offenders. It included things. I had a bill this year that said, look, if you've committed a violent crime in Virginia, and you are arrested, tried, and convicted, well, then when you get out of jail, we're going to immediately hand you over to ICE. It's not an option. You're going to immediately get handed over to ICE. Don Scott didn't even allow that bill to get a hearing, right? So just understand this is the agenda going forward, and they have all the votes to do it, right? Everyone's like, what do we do? You can try to sue. You can try to sue, but elections have consequences, and the consequences are they're going to run as far to the left as they possibly can this next legislative cycle. And the reason why is because there's no elections there's midterms on the federal level, but there's no elections in Virginia. So they're going to run as far to the left as they possibly can. They're going to try to implement as much as they possibly can, because what they know is that even if there's a backlash, they're probably not going to lose control of the House. They're probably not going to lose control of the Senate. And they did a very, very good job of sticking to all of their legislative priorities when they were only leading the House by 1 vote. And now they're going to have 13. So they've got some space, and they're going to go as far to the left as possible. For anybody that thought that Abigail Spanberger would be a moderate and maybe temper some of that, Abigail Spanberger is going to be introduced to Don Scott and Louise Lucas very, very, in a very, very definitive way, where they're going to make it very clear to her that to the extent that she wants any of her agenda passed, she will be a blank check for whatever Don and Louise want. And so the process of that will be, they will be staffing the bureaucracy with as many people of the far left as they possibly can. All of the appointments will be, far left. You're not going to see a lot of people that maybe had really good experience that weren't on board with like the woke agenda. Like that's just not going to happen. They see this as, especially with Jay Jones, they see this as they ran a very flawed candidate against arguably our strongest candidate on the campaign cycle, Jason Mieres, and they still won. They still won with all the news, with all the social media, with everyone. They still won. And so in their minds, they're like, no, we have an absolute mandate to impose as far a left-wing agenda as possible. And we're going to use the power of government to, once again, consolidate our power, expand our power, and reward our friends and punish our enemies. That's what they're going to do. And the other thing that's going to be impacted by this is that there's 4 constitutional amendments now that are going to go through, right? The only way we could have stopped those was if we would have taken 2 seats in the House. Well, they gained 13. So those constitutional amendments are going to fly through the General Assembly, and then they're going to go, and the way that they're trying to set it up now is they're trying to have a special election for it. So it's not even going to go through the process where you show up to vote in the midterms and then you also vote on these constitutional amendments. No, it's probably going to be some special election where they're going to rally all of their people. They're going to spend millions of dollars and they're going to get out their vote in a way that they've proven they can do consistently. And we're going to try to do the same. But the bottom line is we couldn't convince our people to get out and vote against Jay Jones. So I don't know how we're going to get them to vote for a bunch of constitutional amendments at a time of year where nobody's expecting to show up and vote for anything. And so the 4 constitutional amendments that you're going to see probably on the ballot early next year are going to be abortion through all 9 months worth of pregnancy. And by the way, that abortion amendment is written so broadly that we had to ask questions on whether or not it was your fundamental right to get sterilized at 17, or if that would require parental permission. That's how open they wrote this. You can essentially get an abortion for any reason up to month 9, period, the end. The other thing that you're going to see is they're going to remove, Virginians voted to enshrine traditional marriage between one man and one woman in the Virginia Constitution. Obviously, this was overruled by the Supreme Court decision, but they're now going to try to change it in the Virginia Constitution. Now, keep in mind, they're not just going to change this. This is going to be, once it is implemented, once it has been, enshrined in the Constitution, this will be used to apply pressure to religious organizations. They're going to say all day long that's not what it's for. They're going to say all day long they have no intention of doing that. Okay, but these are the same people that think you're a bigot if you don't agree with their tax policy. So please spare me this idea that they're not going to utilize this law to challenge some of the status of religious organizations or institutions within the Commonwealth. And by the way, there's going to be a number of left-wing religious institutions that step up in order to give top cover to this sort of government power. So that's happening. The other thing that's happening is they're going to allow for the automatic restoration of voting rights for anybody that has completed their sentence, to include felons. Right now in Virginia, if you commit a felony, you lose your voting rights. You can petition the governor and you can get it back. And governors have been pretty generous about restoring voting rights to felons. The current Speaker of the House of the Commonwealth of Virginia, right, was a convicted felon who got his voting rights back by Governor Bob McDonnell, a Republican, right? So it's not like this system was impossible or anything like that. What's going to happen now is, let's say that you are convicted of sexual assault on a child, but you do your sentence credits and you get out early. You automatically get voting parity with your victim. Let's say you murdered someone and you get out on compassionate parole. You automatically have voting parity with your victim, right? Spare me this idea that they were just trying to do this as justice for everybody once you've served your time. This was purely to try to get more Democrat votes in a state for which they clearly already have enough to win. So that's what's going to happen. All right. So just keep in mind, it's going to be the case after this constitutional amendment passes the General Assembly again, and then goes to a ballot referendum, that somebody could have committed the most egregious acts you can imagine against a child, and the moment they get out of jail, they automatically get voting parity back with their victim. There you go. We were told that was the Christian thing to do. I had a hard time finding that in Scripture. And then, of course, the last one is the redistricting. So they want to bring back partisan redistricting for congressional seats. And if that's the case, they would essentially have the power to, right now, Virginia, which has traditionally been pretty evenly split at the top, has 5 Republican seats and 6 Democrat seats in Congress. They could write those lines to create 10 Democrat seats and 1 Republican. They could write them very easily to create 9 Democrat and 2 Republican seats. And so you should just assume that that's exactly what they're going to do. And here's the part that I need everyone to understand. With respect to everything I just mentioned, they can do it all, right? Like you can yell at the RPV, you can yell at Republicans in the House or in the Senate. We don't have the votes. We don't have the vote. This is how elections work. And this is how voting on legislation works. We don't have the votes to stop any of it. And Abigail Spanberger is going to sign all of it. Right? So for the next 2 years, they will enshrine as much as they possibly can. And knowing that even in 2 years, if there's a backlash, let's say Virginians are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea it would get this bad. And we take back the House and the Senate. Let's say we take back the House and the Senate in 2 years. Well, they still have the governor, so they can veto everything. Right? Let's say that just like last time, when we took back the House and the governor, like the same thing that was up this year, we took that back 4 years ago. We took back the House, we took back the governorship. They still controlled the Senate by 1 vote, and they prevented any rolling back of the agenda that they had implemented in the 2 years where they had complete control. So look, I got to hand it to the Democrats. When they're in charge, they wield power. And they're about to wield a whole lot of it. And while I'm always open to hearing, critiques again of the Virginia GOP, of our candidates, this is real simple. Republican voters did not show up to vote, and a lot of people I see this all the time, where they will say, there's no difference between Republicans and Democrats. Okay, to everybody saying that in Virginia, would you want to live in California? No. Okay. Would you want to live in Massachusetts? No. Okay. Would you want to live in Illinois? No. Okay. All right. Well, then clearly you recognize that there actually is a difference between Democrats and Republicans. Doesn't mean every Republican is good. Doesn't mean I don't have problems with a lot of my Republican colleagues. I have. Some of them have been very public. I have ran against incumbent Republicans. My wife ran against an incumbent Republican. So nobody's going to tell me we haven't dedicated time, effort, money to trying to hold the Republican Party accountable and to be strong in their principles and convictions. Okay, but I'm telling you that on the whole, if you really believe that, if you really believe there's no difference, you are about to find out how wrong you are in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I have an incredible respect for all of my Republican colleagues who are returning next year. I'm very happy that my replacement, Karen Hamilton, won her election overwhelmingly. She's going to be a great representative for the 62nd District in the Virginia House of Delegates. But again, they don't have the votes, guys. They don't have the votes. So here's what they can do. They can carry legislation, which will die in a subcommittee. They can vote no, which I'm sure good people like Karen will do, and they can get up and they can give speeches and they can tell you about what's going on and they can tell you about the internal workings of what's happening, so you're not taken by surprise. But understand that is the limit of the power they currently possess going into the next legislative cycle. That's it. They can inform, they can vote no, they can carry legislation, they'll never see the light of the day. That's it. That's what they can do. That's the power that the Republicans have. Is what it is. Let me see. I'm going to take questions here. And actually, let me take questions first. Does anybody have any specific questions that they don't feel like I have answered about, Virginia, what's going on or what's potentially going to go on? If anybody has any questions, go ahead and do them now. I'm going to wait a little bit before I move on to New York City. The last thing I will say is it's not a whenever people say there's no hope, like anybody that's seen me talk, again, I'm a Christian. I always believe in hope. I always do. I really do. I always leave room for the miraculous. But I do think that people need to be aware of what's about to happen and aware of the fact that from a practical standpoint, there's very, very little that can be done. Umbasa said, what about gun rights? Yeah, I covered that first. It's one of those things where you're essentially they're going to come after your guns, and you should expect Chicago, New York style gun laws, because that's what they're going to try to pass. Dan Helmer will be the one to carry it, most likely. I need to run for governor. I do not. What about secession? Okay, so people have brought this up before. I had people call me up going, why can't the red counties in Virginia just join West Virginia? That is not an easy process, and it's not a practical one. It's just not one that would probably, one, you would need West Virginia to agree, two, you would need Congress to agree. Do you think we have the votes in Congress to do that? Do you think we have the votes in the state legislature? We don't have it. So it's not a real viable option unless, it just isn't. It just isn't. Nick, is there any way out of it short of a miracle straight from God? At this point, no, because it's going to take significant rebuilding over several years and several election cycles. Because again, Democrats are not just going to get in there and implement tax and regulatory policy. They're going to implement their policy in such a way as to expand their leads, right? So more people are going to be dependent upon them. They're going to have even more control over your schools. They're going to have more control over your local zoning. They're going to have more control over your healthcare. And so more and more, you're going to look at all the things which are necessary for life, and you're going to recognize that, oh, well, if I piss them off, I don't get these things. And so, no, it's going to take a lot of dedicated rebuilding over time in order to correct for the things that just happened last night. That's just the reality. All right, question. Let me see here. Here's a question. Why in the stupid bubble do you believe that God's the one who gave us our Constitution to protect freedom from religion? All right. Well, I'm not even going to answer that. Why do I believe that God's the one that gave us our Constitution protected freedom from religion? I don't believe you have a constitutionally protected right of freedom from religion. The only thing that was in Virginia and in the federal Constitution, what you have is restrictions on the federal government being able to impose a particular religious faith. That's what you have, right? So get it right, please. What is the grassroots solution? So the best thing that you can do at this point, Wandering Warrior, is you can fight at the local level, your sheriff's race, your board of supervisors race, your school board's race. All of those things are very important. So if you can start to build back at a local level, if you have a sheriff that is not going to be too keen on implementing what I believe are unconstitutional gun laws, that's very helpful. If you have a school board that is willing to stand up to the state and not put up with nonsense, there's still a lot of constitutional control kept at the local level for school boards. If you can start to actually build a good bench of strong candidates that have proven themselves and been willing to fight and stand, well, then that gives you your bench of candidates that you can run for state office and federal office. And then you just have to be ready for unique opportunities when they present themselves, right? Nobody thought that Glenn Youngkin was going to win originally, and yet he did. And it gave us a bit of a reprieve. We were able to get some things done that were good. And so that's the part where you have to build back at the very foundation. The other thing I would say is, like, look, guys, everyone gets mad when I say this. You need to understand that the reason why so many voters and so many young voters believe this garbage, the reason why Mamdani did overwhelmingly successful with young voters, is because they're not being taught the dangers of socialism and communism in school. They're just not. And so if your school system is not reflecting your values, if it's not actually preparing your kids to be able to enter into a free country and respond accordingly, well, then don't be surprised when they vote for people that just promise to give them crap. And so parents are going to have to take a really hard look on who are you allowing to educate your children. And I realize people always say, Nick, I can't afford it, or there's no okay, but that doesn't change the facts on the ground. I'm giving you the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground is that most of your school curriculum and your universities, which are training your teachers, are training your teachers to be activists. Doesn't mean that all your teachers are. You might have some great teachers, but do not fool yourself in thinking that that is not the project that is going on within the university system. Okay, are constitutional counties withstand those new overarching gun laws, or is it just bluster and positioning? So, Finney, here's the thing with that. No, your counties actually, your sheriffs are constitutional officers. Here's the dirty little secret, right? Whenever the state passes something, they rely on local law enforcement in order to enforce those laws. So if your local sheriff basically says, I'm not going to enforce this, or let's say your local sheriff doesn't say, I'm not going to enforce this, they just don't prioritize it, well, then theoretically you can get away with a lot, right? But the problem is that over time, all it takes is for some law enforcement entity to decide to prosecute you for it, or make an example of you, or make an example of your sheriff. And now all of a sudden you have some real issues. So it's not all bluster. It really isn't. It's not all bluster. But it's not just it's not the silver bullet that people sometimes want to believe that it is. All right, going down here and look at this question. How do you think this will upset the homesteaders? I don't know specifically. What you can expect to see is, don't expect any food freedom legislation anytime soon. Again, expect in certain counties, you're probably going to see higher property taxes. You're going to see more restrictions. Like if you had any hope that you were going to get to do more things with respect to raw milk, or you're going to do more like direct to consumer sales, that's almost certainly not going to happen at this point. So in any of the food freedom stuff I had, probably not going to happen. Okay, I think that's all the question. Jess says, question: how would Spanberger's governorship be different than McAuliffe's or Northam's? Would it be more of the same? McAuliffe's was a little different because we controlled the General Assembly when McAuliffe was in charge. So he couldn't do a whole lot. He could veto a lot, but he couldn't do a whole lot. Northam was different because when he came in, he was considered a moderate Democrat, but then he got caught with the whole, Klanhood thing in his school yearbook, and the Democrats controlled the General Assembly. So Ralph Northam ended up being a blank check for whatever the Democrats wanted in the Virginia General Assembly. So what you will see is Abigail Spanberger will govern. The impact is she will govern very similar to the way Ralph Northam did, which the General Assembly will get a blank check. There will be certain things that Abigail Spanberger does in order to try to protect her moderate credentials, but only to a point. It certainly won't be anything that really pisses off her base or her donors. But Abigail Spanberger doesn't just want to be governor of Virginia. She wants to be president or U.S. senator one day or whatnot. And so she will operate in such a way as to build all the bridges that she needs to with the proper donors and the legislative power within the General Assembly. But I think she's a blank check for Don Scott and Louise Lucas. Sergeant Pickles, my kids are homeschooled. I live in the woods, and yet I cannot live in peace in Washington. 120 years my family has been here, but it's hard to stay. This is the part where a lot of people are going to be asking the question of, do I stay? I'll put it this: the whole fight or flight question. I'm always going to fight. It's just in my nature. I'm always going to fight. The question of where you fight from, though, matters, because in some cases you might have a place where you really can build back and you can fight, and maybe some elections you lose and some you win, but it makes sense. And in a state where you can still have the relative freedom to raise and educate your children in the way that you would like to. I would say that for a lot of people, once you get to a point where you feel like the state is really infringing on essential liberties. So for me, those essential liberties have to do with things like my gun rights. It has to do with my right to raise and educate my children the way I see fit. It has to do with the way I see the protection of innocent human life. It has to do with whether or not I feel like that we have a legal apparatus that is going to directly target people for political differences. Once you get to a point where that is the case, and government has kind of been weaponized against you and what you believe, it is a perfectly fair and reasonable question to say, should I continue to fight here, or should I fight from a state that doesn't hate my guts? Because we're not just fighting for individual states, right? We're fighting for the country as a whole, and we're fighting for a set of principles and values. And so I think all of that's important. And I think those are important questions for people to ask. But you have to pray about it. You have to ask it on an individual level and decide what's best. Question, don't know if you've already answered this, missed the first part of the stream, but why do you think voter turnout was so abysmal? What did the GOP fumble on or lose so badly? There's going to be a lot of speculation on this. I think one of the things that's happened with the GOP is that a lot of our voters are actually new GOP voters. And a lot of them came to the party because of Donald Trump. And Republicans assume that because if they voted for Trump, they'll vote for you. And that's not the case. So we have a lot of voters that are tending to vote Republican now for the first time ever, but they want to vote for somebody that they actually think is addressing their needs and concerns. And that's easy to do when you have a presidential ticket. That can be a little bit more difficult to do in other races. The other thing that you also see typically in Virginia is whoever wins the presidential race, there's usually a backlash in Virginia, because that ends up, so we've seen that before in the past where a Democrat won and then a Republican governor won. More frequently, though, that backlash has only gone in one direction. I mean, we did get Governor Youngkin in there. And so I think Democrats were very motivated to vote. They did. A lot of Republicans that had voted for Donald Trump kind of thought, well, yeah, Donald Trump's taking care of it. And because we have off-year elections, that also usually depresses turnout. So I think all of those things factor into it. There's going to be a lot of other people that say that the Virginia Republican Party should have done X, Y, or Z. Can I just tell you all something really quick? Just so you know, the Virginia Republican Party doesn't really have any money. You look at these GOP groups in other states, they have a ton of money. The reason why is because in most states, you can only donate a certain amount to a candidate. So if I have $10,000 to donate and I can give $10,000 to the candidate, I give it to the candidate. If I have $10,000 to donate and I can only donate $1,000 to the candidate, I give $1,000 to the candidate, and then I give the $9,000 to the state GOP, and they do things. In Virginia, it's unlimited donating to the candidates. And so most people donate to the candidates. And the end result of that, the practical reality of that, is you tend to have a weaker state party apparatus. Most people don't know this. And so they just think the Virginia GOP is asleep at the wheel. That has been the case in some instances, but it's not always the case. And so I'm not making excuses. I just want people to understand how these rules impact results. Okay, let me see. Again, if you got a question for me, if you put question and then answer your question, it makes it easier for me to pop it out of the chat. I'll see this other one. Linda said, how do you see these future policies affecting the elderly, retired, afford to keep their homes? There's certain things in the Virginia Constitution that protect that when it comes to things like the spouse of veterans or things of that nature. But I don't know. I don't know on that one. I do think that you're going to see, especially in higher urban areas, you're going to see more cases where you have reassessment of housing and people are going to be priced out of their homes because they can't pay the taxes. And so without some sort of legislative mechanism in order to prevent that from happening, you're going to see that become a problem in certain areas, but I don't know to what extent. So I wish I had a better answer for you on that one. Question for you. How do you win against a group of people whose whole political talking point is, I'm going to give you free stuff, and take it a step further, is the same party that celebrates violence against their enemy? Yeah, K-Bear, it's an important question, because obviously it's, for the politician, I've heard it put this way before. The people that just want to be left alone will typically lose elections to the people that are giving stuff away for free. And so one of the things that maintains a population that is highly skeptical of government handouts is a population that is well educated as to the dangers of government handouts. Here's my question. Do you think a government school system is going to teach kids to be leery of government handouts? No. That's the bottom line. My kids could sit here and talk for an hour on the dangers of government handouts and the dangers of what it creates within society and the perverse incentive structures and the economic, malfeasance that takes place as a result of it. They get to, why? Because I educated them in that, because my wife educated them in that, because we read them Thomas Sowell, right? We gave them the examples. But if you're presuming that they're going to get that in your public school system, the answer is no, they're not. In fact, it's going to be quite the opposite. They're probably going to be asked to write papers on how the government should do more to protect the climate and to provide healthcare and to provide education and to pay for free college. So if that's all they're getting within their school system, don't be surprised when people think that not only is that an enticing thing to wish for, but it's a perfectly appropriate thing to wish for, because after all, that's the government's job. And so the politicians, which are promising to do those things, are fitting right in with the education that they've received. So if you want to beat that, you can't send your kids off to an educational environment that is teaching them to think that way about it. And I know a lot of parents that will say, well, yeah, they learn that in school, but I teach them differently at home. Okay, but you're still creating this bifurcation in your child's mind with who do they believe? Do they believe their parents, or do they believe the educational experts, right? So I know that's not an answer a lot of people like to hear, but it is the reality. When it comes to violence against their enemy, it's kind of the same thing. When your kids are being taught either by Hollywood or by social media or by politicians or by teachers that there is a good way to think about all these things and a bad way to think about all these things, and the bad people are Hitler and Nazis and fascists and threat to democracy, well, then we shouldn't be surprised. It's one thing. It's one thing when a politician calls one of their colleagues mean or stupid or greedy. It's something very different when they call them a fascist or a Nazi or a threat to democracy. See, in one case, when they use ad hominem attack against you, they're depriving you of moral legitimacy in the hope that nobody listens to you. But when they start calling you a fascist or a threat to democracy, they're not just trying to deprive you of moral legitimacy. They're actually establishing a moral framework in the minds of people where it's okay to commit acts of violence against you. And again, that starts young. There's a reason why so many young people are celebrating Charlie Kirk getting murdered, because they had been taught by their teachers, by their professors, by the people they listen to on social media, what they had been taught, these people are evil. And so, of course, violence had to be used against them. And so a lot of it, I just can't emphasize enough, so much of this is education. My children think it's abhorrent to murder your political opponents, regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum. My children think it's ridiculous to have the government run the economy. Why do they think that? Because I presented good arguments and evidence. They researched it themselves and came to the same conclusion. So if you want to beat that sort of mindset, it starts young. That's the reason why Democrats are so obsessed with controlling education. Question. Okay, sorry, looking through here, trying to go through these faster. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster on some of these. Will retired service members be impacted by this election? If so, how? Will active duty service members be impacted in Virginia and New York City? I think that in Virginia, we've had pretty good bipartisan support on the various benefits that we've had for retired members of the military. I don't anticipate there's going to be any significant changes to what it currently exists, but I also don't think you're going to see much more. Ducky said, do you think the Tucker Fuentes situation is exposing the uniparty or just the neocon demise, and will it affect the midterm? I think we're actually doing a whole series on my podcast called Making the Argument on What Should the Right Want. And one of the things that we're talking about is recognizing that just like there's a wide spectrum on the left, there's also a wide spectrum on the right. And not everybody who's fighting woke wants the same thing once it's defeated. And so we have a lot of in-depth conversations on, okay, as Americans, patriotic Americans who may be on the right, but who may disagree with each other, how do we adjudicate this? How do we figure out what it is that we're ultimately fighting for? And we talked to a lot of people on that. Orrin McIntyre, James Lindsay, Doug Wilson. These are people that have very, very different ideas about where we should go. But I hope I hope that will help answer your question, but it's a longer one. Question, Christian and homeschooling family, are we honestly at risk of losing that right? My county has terrible education standards. I love teaching Christ to my kids. You're not going to have like an outright, I don't think you're going to have they're not going to make like homeschooling illegal, overnight. What they're going to do is they're going to take away things probably like religious exemption, and then they're probably going to start to slowly implement more and more requirements for you to homeschool that is going to constantly get the government back into the process. And the way that one of the reasons why they're going to do that is because they will come up with various standards to either control what you're teaching or make it more difficult to do so in order to incentivize you to go back into the public school system. That's what I anticipate happening in the short term. Hillbilly Haven question: why can't we tax people by the way they vote? If you vote for more services, let them pay for it. Theoretically, you could. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. It's interesting. In Massachusetts, they had a thing where people could actually volunteer to give more money to the government. And John Kerry, who was running around telling everybody they needed to pay more in taxes, never checked the box to give more to the government. So it's amazing how, they never implement more. The other argument that they'll say is, well, the reason why they can't pay more for those services is because they need the services in the first place because, they're economically disadvantaged or whatnot. But again, what this comes down to is the more people that you have on the dole. And by the way, the dole is not just the people receiving welfare benefits. The dole is also corporations and companies which come to the government for special protections, subsidies, regulations, which protect them for their competition. So there's the dole that the Democrats are looking for is much bigger than just like EBT recipients. All right, Team 55, do you foresee a tipping point where Republicans and conservatives say no more of the BS and use their own tactics against them? I think you're already starting to see that argument taking place. One of the reasons, Democrats said that the only reason why we're doing this redistricting is because of what's going on in Texas. Well, Texans could have very easily said, yeah, well, the only reason we're doing it is because what you guys were doing in Illinois or Massachusetts or the rest of New England. So I do think you're getting to a point where more red states are going to start to say, look, it doesn't work to just stay on the stead lines or try to assume some sort of moral high ground that's not respected. The real question that's going to have to be asked is, there are certain tactics that you can use that I would say are morally justifiable. There are other tactics that you use that I think are not morally justifiable. And this is the debate going on in the right now. Is who are we willing to work with to achieve our end states, and what tactics are we willing to use, and what tactics are a clear violation of our moral principles? And that's an important argument that has to take place. And I don't know where it's going to land yet, but I do know that the game's changing. I am far more comfortable with Donald Trump doing certain things than I would have been 10 years ago, right? Again, there's still moral boundaries that I refuse to cross and will never cross, but there's other things that are happening right now where I'm like, hey, look, I'm sorry. This is what we have to do to fight back. Question, our founding fathers had a line where they refused to comply, right? Where is our line? That is a very good question. I think that there's a couple things you have to keep in mind. The founding fathers were talking about what they had come to consider to be a foreign entity. And so there was this bifurcation that existed between the colonies and the mother country in the form of England that drew very, very clear and distinct lines. The other thing that you saw the last time that there was significant conflict or talks of succession is that you had very, very big cultural divides between various regions. Right now, a lot of the divides within the United States are urban versus rural, or suburban versus urban and rural. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think people have their own internal line, but what they also look for is legitimacy in action. So conservatives, it's very important to us that our actions be moral, not just useful. And so I think what you're going to see in some of those cases is you're going to start to see states push back. So for instance, let's imagine that you had a Gavin Newsom presidency, God forbid. And let's say that you had a Gavin Newsom appointing members of the Supreme Court and they just arbitrarily overturned the Second Amendment. I think you would have states that would push back and say, no, that doesn't apply here. And then the federal government, you'd cause a constitutional crisis where it would be something where you didn't just have individuals fighting back, you had entire state governments that were standing up to federal overreach. And there's some on the left that imagine that that's what they're doing right now to Donald Trump with respect to deployment of National Guard or ICE enforcement. I think they're wrong, but that's what they think they're doing. So that's how I see that potentially coming about. I don't think it's just one person standing up and saying, I'm fighting back now. Again, trying to go through these as quick as I can, guys. Question, realistically, what can we expect to see in terms of gun restrictions going forward? If you go back and you look at the gun bills that they passed in the House and the Senate in Virginia this year, go look at Dan Helmer's legislation in the House. You can go on Legislative Information Services and take a look. You can expect that as the bare minimum. You will probably get something worse. And what that equals out to is there'll be a grandfather clause for the guns that are banned, but a complete assault weapons ban, which an assault weapon in Virginia is defined as a semi-automatic rifle with like a pistol grip. That constitutes a an assault rifle, which is absurd. You're also going to see it'll be a crime to own high-capacity magazines. The other thing to keep in mind, he originally wanted a felony. He settled for a misdemeanor because they didn't want political backlash. But now that they feel like the wind is at their back, they may go for the felony. Well, now if you have 5, 30-round magazines, that's 5 felony counts. Yeah, you're losing your voting rights, right? You're not just losing your gun rights, you're losing your voting rights. And so you can realistically expect that something that bad could happen. Let me see here, trying to find some other ones. Okay, what are some liquid? Does this mean taxation without representation in California? I don't know. Not California is going to be. I mean, look, California. I'm old enough to remember when California could elect sizable contingents to the General Assembly and elect Republican governors. So what happened? Why is it not that way anymore? Well, you had a combination of factors. One, California has a lot of things going for it economically. It has a lot of things going for it in natural beauty. So a lot of people wanted to move to California. Also, when people would move to California for when there were good deals for things like Silicon Valley or tech companies or startups, there was also really good legislation on the books with things. I remember when California passed a referendum to deny illegal immigrants public benefits. That passed by popular referendum in California in the 90s. Right? There's also things where property taxes in California, once you buy a house, you're locked into the property taxes when you buy it in order to prevent people from being priced out of their homes. But what ends up happening is the more control Democrats get of the state apparatus, the more they seek to control the education system, and the more they seek to control the bureaucracy. Because when you control the bureaucracy and the education system, one, you're creating new voters for the education system, and two, you're getting to reward friends and punish enemies. And again, when you have a system like that, gradually over time, what happens is the people that just want to be left alone end up complying more and more and more and more until you just have a state takeover, and it becomes absurd to even imagine that you could elect a Republican governor in California. So what eventually ends that? You have a crisis point. Essentially, you have some sort of crisis where the lights go off or crime just gets so bad that people are fed up with it. And you've had these kind of mini crisis points, like in San Francisco when the George Soros a district attorney was kicked out by the voters of San Francisco because they were just so sick of the crime. But unfortunately, that's usually what it takes. When you get this degree of leftist control, it has to fail so miserably that people are actually willing to try something else. Okay, question. Do you think the church, where is it? Okay, do you think the church has a role in teaching the people to be more involved politically? Here's what I will tell you, and this is what I always tell pastors. I don't believe God is partisan. I also don't think he's neutral on the issues. All right. So, again, I'm not looking for a world. I'm not looking to live in a country ruled by religious clerics, but I want Christianity to inform the country I live in. Why wouldn't it? All legislation is informed by morality. The question is what source of morality are you using? Right? Secular atheism. Well, good luck with that. Secular atheism doesn't provide you objective morality. It can provide you a kind of utilitarian morality based off of majority rules, but it's not objective morality. So if you believe that murder is objectively wrong, right, all atheism can essentially tell you is, well, we don't prefer it, or we don't think it produces, good results on the whole, right? And look, some people think that's sufficient. I don't. I think it's objectively wrong. But the reason why I think it's objectively wrong is because I have a moral framework that actually provides for that kind of objectivity. So yeah, I do believe that pastors need to understand that unless you want the government to be actively used against you, we're not advocating for the government to essentially impose Christianity on anybody, but to the sense that morality informs all laws, yeah, I would like Christian morality to inform the law. And in order to do that, Christians got to be politically active. Okay, what's another one here? Okay, question. Would you still push homeschooling in more Republican areas that don't indoctrinate our kids? Yes. And the reason why I would is because I first started homeschooling out of necessity. I got out of the military. We didn't know we were going to live yet. And so we had to continue our kids' education on our own while we found a place to live. Then I homeschooled because I didn't like what was going on in the public school district. By the way, I didn't like what was going on in the public school system in a 64% Republican district. So if you think that you're in a safe red district and crap isn't going on in your schools, you're blind. I serve on the education committee in Virginia. Nobody's going to tell me I'm wrong on this. I've just seen too many facts. And then thirdly, I started educating because I absolutely loved it. And it once again reinforced this close relationship and bond that I have with my kids. Didn't mean that they didn't have other teachers. They did. Didn't mean they didn't get exposed to other ideas. They did constantly. I challenged my kids on their beliefs and faith and everything as well. But the overall net benefit of homeschooling, I thought, was just outstanding. Public education at its best, at its very best, is still a mass production approach to education. It was not designed with your child in mind because it couldn't possibly be designed with your child in mind. But a homeschool environment allows you to design the educational environment with your child's needs, wants, desires, objectives in mind. And that's why I would still push it. Bumping two good questions. One, how are you thinking they will affect the midterms? Should the church be taking more active role in politics? So, because I think I answered, how do I think this will affect the midterms? The midterms are going to be a different dynamic. So Democrats are going to be motivated right now because they feel like they push back against the Trump administration. Republicans are also going to be motivated because they see how bad it can actually get. So I think the midterms are a little bit different. I'm not sure yet. I think it's a little bit too soon to tell on how the midterms are going to be impacted or what impact this will have on it. But the redistricting battles will have an impact on midterms, because if you have more partisan redistricting, that'll give you a greater indication of who's going to be winning those seats. And yes, I do believe that, again, I'm a Christian. I believe Christians are called to be salt and light wherever we go. I don't think politics is any different. I think that what Christians should do is be honest about what informs their worldview, just like I would expect anybody to be honest about what informs the worldview. But I think it's absolutely absurd, nonsensical, and illogical for Christians to say, I don't have a role to play in politics. Okay, let me see. Let me see if I missed any more here. Question, would you still be, okay, I already got that one. Okay, I think I'm up to date on the questions. I apologize if I missed any. You can put them up front. The other thing that I would say is about the whole thing with Mamdani, because this is unique. Mamdani is not just a liberal or leftist. Mamdani is both, I would argue, on some level an Islamist, and on another level, he is a communist. Like, he wants to see. Here's the other thing too. People will try to get in these terms. Well, he's not a communist. He's a socialist. The animating feature of both socialism and communism is the abolition of the private ownership of the means of production, right? People have tried to rehabilitate socialism as, oh, I want capitalism. I just want more social welfare programs. Okay, then you're not a socialist. That's not socialism. Socialism is the abolition of the private ownership of the means of production. Socialism, the way that Lenin tried to explain socialism was he said that it was an intermediary step, because true communism doesn't even have a state. Theoretically, true communism is just the dictatorship of the proletariat. Everything is owned, by the laborers and whatnot. But socialism was this intermediary step where the government was going to control these things on behalf of the proletariat, until we could get to the point where they had created the new communist man, and then you could move to a stateless and classless society. But this whole idea that, oh, well, no, I'm not a communist, I'm a socialist. I like to live in it. I'm like, oh, so you're worse. At least the communist believes that there's some sort of fairy tale where you no longer use state coercion to direct things. The socialist just accepts that we're always going to have a state apparatus in order to direct things, and so embraces it. So it doesn't make you better. But what they're going to do over there, what's going to be interesting is that a lot of people, I think, are going to get up and flee New York. The question is, how many of them fleeing New York are going to understand exactly why they're fleeing? And how many of them are just going to go for a better place with better tax laws and then bring the same sort of, ideological nonsense that led to the conditions where a communist could get elected mayor of New York City? Now, the thing that New York City is going to find out real quick, and this mayor is going to find out real quick, is he's going to be heavily dependent on the state and the feds to help him out at some point if he wants to implement these things, because his tax base is about to get harmed significantly. There's going to be a lot of people that relocate, because when a guy is actively coming after you and he sees you as the oppressor, and he wants to run grocery stores, and he wants to run government housing, and he wants to run all of these things, the end result is the people that normally produce those things leave. And then what you find out real quick is the bureaucrats they put in charge of doing these things suck at it. A lot of the reasons why you have the problems in New York City right now is because they've already implemented socialist style policies without actually embracing socialism. Because we still have, we still have the United States Constitution, we still have property rights. If it was up to Mamdani, a lot of those things would essentially go away and be organized differently. And again, don't tell me he hasn't said this. He talked about seizing the means of production. That's what that means. It means the government coming in and seizing major industry and then running it from the government. That's so he's going to try to do as much of this as he possibly can. He's going to run into the Margaret Thatcher problem, right? He's going to run out of other people's money very, very quickly. And then he's going to rely on outside subsidies or federal funds or grants or things like that in order to implement some of this. And either way, it's just not going to work. And then crime's going to become a major problem. Again, he's going to have more of the people that are not going to help him actually run the city stay or come to New York to get the goodies. And he's going to have more of the people that you actually need to effectively run a city leave, because it turns out that most people don't like staying in a place where they're continually punished for productivity. And that's what communism does, is it punishes productivity. Okay, Umbasa, podcast talk with Young Ripa59 here on YouTube. He hated woke and comics and made his own Texas-based. Cool, Young Ripa59. All right, good. Yeah. Hey, listen, it was funny because I have a lot of students that will ask me, how do I get involved in politics? And I say, well, look, if you're really passionate about politics and you feel like it's where God's leading you, great, get involved in politics. But honestly, we could really use more people in pop culture. We need more artists. We need more artists, actors, singers, musicians, authors, all that stuff. So I'm always thrilled when we're fighting back in the cultural areas as well. BW, question, Nick, any idea on how to change culture on the right? We'll never win when it's accepted for the left to spew their politics, but taboo for the right. BW, excellent question. One of the things that you will typically notice with conservatives in public settings is this whole polite détente to not discuss religion and politics in the public space. The left does not adhere to that. The left insists on talking about the public space and doesn't care if it makes you uncomfortable. I have now come to the conclusion that while I am never attempting to be rude, I am going to feel just as free to talk about the things I believe in the public space as they are, right? And so I'm not going to. And if they get offended by that, well, we've allowed offense to be a substitute for an argument for way too long. The problem is that they got offended about some things, and so we moderated our behavior to try to keep peace within public spaces. So what did they do? They just got offended by more and more things until our very presence and lives offend them. Apparently, the lives of our kids offend them, and so I don't care about their offense anymore. If I thought their offense was reasonable, I would search for ways to be a reasonable human being with them. Their offense is not reasonable. Their offense is a tactic, and so now when I'm in a public space and a conversation comes up, I don't moderate my tone. I don't moderate what I believe. Again, I still have obligations as a Christian to conduct myself in accordance with my faith, but I am under no obligation to constantly make leftists feel comfortable in ways that they never consider making us feel comfortable. Again, this is where I get in. These are diametrically opposed worldviews. One's going to win, one's going to lose. The one that's actually proud of what they believe has a better chance of winning than one that is constantly acting as if it's ashamed of it. So I'm going to be bold and unapologetic in what I believe. And I will have good faith conversations for people that want them. And for the people that don't engage in good faith conversations, I got better stuff to do. But I can tell you this, your offense doesn't bother me anymore. Okay, Atticus Rex. Nothing to show me how dumb the Democrats truly are than Mamdani's win. Yeah, I don't. It's just it is amazing how corrupted the education system has become and how corrupted the higher education has become. There was this one, I can't remember who it was, but he was a libertarian economist, and he was talking to one of his colleagues in the university system who was essentially a Marxist. And the Soviet Union fell down, and the Berlin Wall fell down, and kind of the evils of communism and the degradation of communism, and the violations of civil liberties and all these things were just coming to the forefront. And it seemed like that it was just so painfully obvious that free markets, market economies had succeeded over and above anything that socialist or centrally planned economies could achieve. And so he looked at his colleague and he goes, "Well, gosh, this has got to be awkward for you." And he goes, "No, actually, it's a blessing." Why is it a blessing? He goes, well, right now, whenever we're extolling the virtues of Marxist economic policy, people point to the degradations of the Soviet Union and say, oh, yeah, but look. He goes, now that that's going away, we'll be able to rehabilitate it. And they have. And again, we dutifully take out second mortgages to send our kids to universities that turn them into little Marxists, and then we wonder what went wrong. Will homeschooling stay legal? In some places, yes. In some places, no. Yeah, in some places, yes. In some places, no. It will be legal wherever I am because I plan to do it. Got an apolitical question for you, Mr. Freitas. I've heard rumors that archaeologists may have discovered the location of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. What do you make of that? Yeah, there's actually been some really interesting discussions on that, on where it actually took place. I think I think the evidence presented that I've seen so far is actually pretty significant. And again, some of this has to do with sulfur deposits and other things like that, not to mention historical writings as to the location. So yeah, there's some really interesting stuff on it. Okay, let me see. Can I get Katie? Can I get to your super chat? All right, let me see. Here it is. Hey Nick, what more can we do in supermajority red states like South Carolina to prevent these kinds of takeovers by Democrats? We've had some problems from our GOP being limp and passive, especially in off years. Katie, you have asked, I'm going to say right now, Katie, I think you've asked the most important question. Because in states like South Carolina, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Idaho, you cannot settle for weak Republicans. You just can't. Now, here's what I'm also going to say. You don't want strong Republicans who are also not very good at politics. It's important. One of the things that we used to always say in special forces is you have to understand your operational environment, because as good as an operator as you may be on an individual level, you still have to work as part of a team, and you still have to work in an environment where, as we always said, the enemy gets a say. And so it's important to understand the operational environment. But when you are in really, really solid red districts, you should insist on solid red representation. Here's what that means. If all your legislators want to do is to create a good business environment, well, here's what will happen. Democrats will thank you for the good business environment, and they will move their business and they will move themselves to your state, and then they will get involved and they will ask why you don't have more pride parades. And they will start to insist on the government doing things that your government never did before. And they will start to insist on things happening in your schools that never happened before. And over time, what happens is they win because they fight for culturally shaping institutions. And so it is not good enough for your red states to just create good economic conditions. They also have to fight for the culturally shaping institutions. So if you are funding a bunch of state universities that are pushing Marxist nonsense, there needs to be consequences for that, right? When you create conditions where Democrats don't want to live there, well, then they don't come there for the tax breaks, right? So Florida learned this. Florida went on there and said, no, we're not just going to fight economic battles. We're going to fight social battles. You don't get to abort your kids through all 9 months of pregnancy here. You don't get to trans your kids here. The more stuff you do like this, the more Democrats feel like, well, I don't want to live in a place where I can't surgically mutilate my child. Good, leave, go away. And for any Republicans that think, well, these are icky topics, we don't want to talk, they're controversial. Okay, good, then you don't need to be here. You don't need to be here. So what I would say, the best thing that you can do in deep red states is look for the reddest districts that you have and start to look at how your representatives are voting. There's 2 sites that I would recommend you checking that run state level scorecards. One of them is Club for Growth. Club for Growth has a very good state level scorecard. The other one is the American Conservative Union. They have very good state level scorecards. The reason why I recommend those 2 is because they look beyond some of the obvious bills to ones that are a little bit less obvious, but give you a really good indication. And anybody that you have in like one of these like R plus 30 or 40 districts, R plus 20 districts, right? These are the ones where they win every time. They never really have a serious challenger. If those guys aren't scoring in the 80s and 90s and the ACU and Club for Growth scorecards, you need to start either pressuring them to vote better or start looking for people that can actually represent the district better, because that's the way that you actually prevent the sort of Democrat takeovers that take place. The other thing is, don't ignore your local elections. Don't ignore your state elections. Don't ignore your local elections, because a lot of times what happens is somebody runs in a nonpartisan race for the Board of Supervisors or for the school board or something like that, and they develop a reputation, they do some favors, and then what ends up happening is people who don't pay attention to politics, like, oh, they're a good guy. I remember telling someone, like, you realize that the person you're electing to school board thinks that boys should be able to shower with your daughter in the lock. Oh, no, she would never think that. I've known her for years. Guess what? I was right and they were wrong. Why? Because I was paying attention to what they actually said, not to the relationship they had built with the community over 30 years. And so a big part of it is, again, make sure that you have good state representation in your reddest districts, because that's Overton window shifting. That's what you need. You need the Overton window on the right. And then don't deny and don't ignore the local ones, because that's a lot of times how the left infiltrates. They actually talk about it in Colorado. It's one of the ways they did it. They were running for nonpartisan positions, established a reputation. And then when they got into state level office, all of a sudden they were doing incredibly liberal things and it was too late. Um, so I hope that answers your question. All right, did I miss one? Hellband, reading the left's forums and listening to their podcast today, they're not celebrating this as a victory. They're proclaiming at the beginning of the fight. How do we get people face off the sidelines and into the fight? So here's a problem that I've noticed being in conservative politics for 20 years and being in elected office for 10 years. If you talk to your average conservative, and there's exceptions to this, but if you talk to your average conservative, the way we prioritize our lives usually goes something like this: God, family, country, generally patriotic, our work, our job, and then politics. Politics is usually the fifth priority for us. And usually the reason why we're getting involved in politics is because we want to keep the government out of God, family, our work. We just want to live free, right? We want the government to focus on the things it should do. Keep the roads open, prosecute criminals, protect us from foreign threats. But other than that, we got this, right? We got this. And then I go to the left. I say, okay, how does the left view government? And people are like, oh, they put government first. No. A lot of the people, especially the most active people on the left, government becomes God, family, work, country. Like for them, government personifies their patriotism to the extent that they have it. Government is their job. They see it as their work, as their labor. And again, one of the big differences here is when you're someone that believes that government is something that we have for certain purposes, but you get your real meaning, purpose, identity, sense of justice within a moral framework, within your religion or something of that nature, then that creates divisions between government's role in society and the role of the individual, the family, the church, etc. When you adopt leftism, no, government is the mechanism that you use to achieve cosmic, social, economic justice, environmental justice, right? And so it becomes critical. It's a part of how you think about just about everything. That creates very, very motivated voters. So the way you got to get people, part of what we have to do here to get people off the fight is, one, sometimes they have to experience the pain. The other thing that you do is don't hand your kids over to be educated by a system that is going to teach them to think about the world very differently than you do. Conservatives have an above replacement birth rate. Leftists don't. I'm telling you right now, leftism would die out as an ideology if it was left to their birth rates, because they have too many abortions and they wait too long to have kids. And when they do have the kid, they have one. So how do they keep winning? They educate your kids. So look, that is the answer. You can win the whole thing in one generation if we just insisted on this sort of educational environment for our kids that actually reflected our values and actually taught them about what a threat communism is, socialism is, a number of these other things as well. So it is a simple answer. I don't claim it's an easy one, but it is a simple answer. Okay, let me see here. I think I've got, all right, I think I got to all the questions. Listen, I hope this guy, again, I just wanted to provide some kind of insight into what was going on here. And again, I think you're going to see some very interesting things over the next couple of years. Virginia is about to implement things that I genuinely believe it's going to take us 20 years and a lot of rebuilding in order to get back. I just think that's going to be the consequences of this election. I'm not telling people, you've got to decide what you're going to do. New York City is about to experience there's going to be certain things that stand in the way of Mamdani getting everything that he wants, but all he's going to do is blame people when he can't deliver on promises. And he has a base which is very comfortable with political violence. And, for all this talk about that's the right that actually commits most acts of political violence. If you believe that, it's because you're believing cooked books and statistics that don't make any sense once you actually look into them. There's a Substack called, I think, Jennifer 22 or Jennifer 24. She took all the studies that were claiming that 80% of political violence originates on the right, and she just decimates it for the absolute sham that it was. When you actually ask people who's more comfortable with political violence, young leftists are, by orders of magnitude, significantly more comfortable with political violence than young conservatives or young moderates. It goes young leftists are the most comfortable with political violence, then young moderates, then young conservatives. And we see that reflected in what's going on. And so when Mamdani can't implement what he wants, he's going to start pointing to the people that he thinks are guilty of it. And he won't even direct them to commit acts of violence. It'll just considered natural. Mrs. Wildwolf, what would you say for a teenager watching your live on the aspect of hard work and education? Look, listen, with everything that's going on, this country still affords you some of the greatest opportunities possible. Now, some states are better than others, right? But the thing that I would tell you is when it comes to your education, look, I'm a Christian. I will always bring things back to my Christian faith because that's the foundation of my worldview. But when it comes to education and working hard, you need to educate yourself because you need to be intellectually sound. You need to be professionally competent, which is to say, it's not about working hard as much as it is dedicating yourself and putting in hard work toward those things that will set you up for professional success. So one of the things I always tell you is digging a ditch with a spork is hard work. It's also worthless. Right? So the reason why you need to develop your education and you need to develop professional skill sets and a good solid work ethic is because when you go into the marketplace and you don't have a sense of entitlement and you have a good work ethic, you're already putting yourself way above so many people within the labor force right now, because they've been taught to be activists in college as opposed to effective entrepreneurs or even effective specialists or technicians. So if you can develop marketable skill sets within the environments that are not going to go away, not going to be replaced by technology anytime soon, and then you can go in with a good attitude and an entrepreneurial spirit. I really encourage people to look at entrepreneurial spirits. It's amazing how much you can achieve in this country, and it's still very, very possible. Right? I'm very hopeful for my country. I'm not hopeful for what's going on in Virginia. I'm not hopeful for what's going on in New York City. At least to the extent that maybe the silver lining is that I think that there are some things that will get so bad that it will be impossible to not draw proper conclusions between the bad things happening and the bad results. But don't lose hope for our country. I'm still very hopeful for America. I look at the direction that young people are headed, especially young men, and that gives me a lot of hope for the future. So continue to educate yourself. Don't rely on the university system to do it. If you're going into a field which actually requires a degree, that may be a requirement. But always take personal responsibility for your education. Recognize that it's not a building you go to. It's a lifelong process of developing both knowledge and wisdom. Find mentors and people that are doing things in the fields that you want to do and actually go out and seek that mentorship from them. Do all those things and I think good things can happen. Question, Nick, is there anything we can do to prevent our city states from becoming like Dearborn, Michigan? Some of that's immigration policy, and some of that's whether or not you set up environments which encourage the Islamification of your community. It is what it is. Like I'm sorry. Like I served overseas with some people that are of the Muslim faith who love America, and some people say, well, then they're not good Muslims. Be that as it may, they love America. They're patriotic. I would fight alongside them any day. But if you have an Islamist mindset or a jihadist mindset, that's not compatible with the United States. Ilhan Omar's philosophy of life and philosophy of government is not compatible with the United States. The new mayor, the guy that's running for mayor of Minneapolis, not compatible with the worldview of the United States. And so I think again we just have to respect something that, well, America has typically been a rather inviting place to come, and a very, very tolerant of different cultural ideas. There still has to be a predominant cultural narrative within the society if you actually want a high trust society that's capable of functioning. And there's a reason why Islam didn't create the United States and will never create the United States, right? Sharia law is not compatible with our United States Constitution. And so some of what you're going to have to need to do is draw a line in the sand within your cities and states to say, yeah, we're not telling you can't worship the way you want to worship. We are telling you don't get to implement Sharia law in the United States in controversy to our state or federal constitutions. All right, I'm going to take a couple more here, guys, and then I'm going to sign off because I've been talking for a while. I'm about to use my voice. Hookham said, question, do you know what all Governor Abbott's tariff on people moving to Texas from New York City entails? I don't. It's going to be interesting to see. Places like California, and I'm sure Mondami will try this in New York City, where if you're trying to leave, they'll essentially impose a tax on you. Or like if you get retirement from one state, they'll tax your retirement regardless of where you go. I wouldn't be surprised if Governor Abbott is looking at this going right now going, I don't want a bunch of people flooding my state who have no idea why they're actually flooding it. And this has been a problem. This has been a problem. You had a ton of people leave California for better economic environments in Texas and Austin, and then they turn Austin into a homeless shelter, right? And so It'll be interesting to see what he does. It'll be interesting to see how it's challenged in court, how the interstate commerce clause might be used to try to prevent some of it. We'll just have to see. Okay, let me see here. Thank you for answering the question. My daughter, she has learned a lot during current events, most since she has been homeschooled. Homeschooling is awesome, man. I love the relationship it has allowed me to have with my kids. Wesley Smith question, at what point is it more expedient to push for the crisis or letting it burn rather than fighting? This is the question of accelerationism. I would say when you've gotten to a point where you have no real hope of winning any elections, it's probably time to remove yourself and fight from a state that doesn't hate your guts. Right? Because there are states that need help and that can do well. There's other states that are doing incredible. Idaho has one of the best state legislatures in the country, if not the best. So again, I think you have to look at, is my state preventing me from providing for my family, educating my children, or defending myself? And if they are doing those things, then the question is, do I have any hope of actually winning elections in a way that can change or move the needle on that? If the answer to that question is no, then at some point I think it's time to leave and fight elsewhere. Just my opinion. I haven't said any question. Do you think that the expected self-sorting from New York City and Virginia is the next step towards civil war velvet divorce? So yeah, the whole concept of velvet divorce is the idea that we just agree that this ain't working out. I don't think the left will ever allow for this ain't just working out. But I do think that as people ideologically self-sort, so as people move not just for the weather or not just for retirement or not just for better taxes, as people move because they want to live in an environment that reflects their values, I think you're going to see certain states becoming far more blue and other states becoming far more red. Does that eventually, I think that leads one of two routes. The most dangerous route, or three routes. The most dangerous route is we're fighting each other. The next route is we just agree that we don't want to live together anymore. We're separate countries. I don't see that as being likely in my lifetime. The third is we actually get back to some sort of respect for federalism, which is to say, California, you're allowed to be as California as you want. Oklahoma, you're allowed to be as Oklahoma as you want. And neither one of us are going to use the federal government to try to tip the scales in favor of one or the other. That was the original intent. I don't see us getting back to that without some sort of conflict that convinces the left that you stay in your lane, we'll stay in ours. But if you cross into ours, we're fighting. And that's unfortunately where I think we could be heading. And I don't want to head that way. I would like us to get back to more of I do think federalism could save our republic. But what that would also require is for localities and states having to live with the consequences of their actions. Without federal bailouts or things of that nature. So we'll see what happens there. All right, a couple more here. Let's see here. Okay, Ethan Snyder said, how much danger do you think West Virginia is of falling given Virginia's fall? West Virginia, I think, is actually trending in the other direction. One of the things that you had in West Virginia was with the coal mines, with some of the unions and whatnot, you had kind of a more stringent loyalty to the Democratic Party, but I think that's pretty much gone now. So I think West Virginia is actually trending in a more positive direction if you're of a conservative mindset, but we'll see. BD Pershing question, do you think in Virginia GOP will have the opportunity to be able to get back into power next cycle? So next cycle, what's going to be up is the House and the Senate. They just won 13 seats in the House, so we'd have to take back 14 to legitimately win a majority. The current map does not seem to show a path to that. That's just my honest opinion. We'll see. Things can change, but that's my opinion today. I don't see how we take back 14 seats without some sort of landslide victory. As far as the Senate, we'd have to take back one or two, really, because they have a lieutenant governor. So if we could take 2 seats in the Senate, very hard to do. Very hard to do. That doesn't sound like a lot until you look at the districts and realize, oh wow, those are multi-million-dollar races for a state Senate seat to try to even have a chance. So if you only take back one house, but you don't take back the other, well, then what ends up happening is you might pass a lot of good bills in the Senate, but it'll die in the House, or you pass them in the House, they die in the Senate. The bottom line is for the next, whatever they implement over the next 2 years is going to be in effect for at least 4 years. And the only way it's not in effect for longer than that is if we back the governor, the House, and the Senate. That's a pretty tall order given what just happened. Okay. Okay, good deal. Thank you, Monco. So Virginia's lost. Okay, leave. Abandon the warrants to their fate. Again, I love Virginia. I'm just giving you an honest. I'm trying to give people an honest postmortem on what's actually happening, because I don't think that I don't think that sugarcoating it is going to make anything better. I think we're going to be honest. Do you think part of the GOP problem is that we are too concerned with national elections and not in local and state? Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of voters that they show up for presidential elections. It didn't used to be this way, by the way. We used to be able to rely on our voters a lot more for local and state. But the dynamics have shifted. A lot of your college-educated people are voting Democrat now. A lot of your blue-collar workers are voting Republican. But a lot of those blue-collar workers are, it's not like they're like diehard Republicans, right? They like Trump, or they might like their congressman or something like that. But politics is not politics is not something they're looking at 24/7, right? They just want to do their job, and so it's difficult sometimes to get them engaged on a level, but that is what it's going to take. Okay, last two questions here. DJ says Gates' statement that there is no climate emergency, total dismantles all agenda 2030. Think of all that crap that statement ended. Use this to your advantage. Yeah, DJ, you're not wrong with respect to what Gates has said, but all I can tell you is this was never about climate change for them. This was about controlling economic outcomes. Climate change was a useful moral tool, but what they wanted was greater control over the government, greater control over the economy. That's what they've always wanted. That is what every single left-wing ideology wants: greater control over the government and over the economy. Every single ideology of the left. How do you achieve that? Well, they used to promise that they would produce better economic outcomes. And then they got to run a couple of experiments called the Soviet Union, North Korea, Cuba, Angola, most of sub-Saharan Africa, and they failed miserably. So what did they shift to? Oh no, this isn't that we can compete with capitalists. It's that we will save the planet. That's right, because capitalism is killing the planet, so we'll save it. So give us control over the economy. They'll just come up with something new. Now it's economic justice, right? So just understand that I absolutely agree with you that we should use that to our advantage, because there are some people out there that really thought that, oh, this is a major catastrophe. And hopefully those people realize that, no, we should be good stewards of our environment, but a lot of what they were pitching was just doomerism and Malthusian arguments, wrapped up in 21st century veneer. But hopefully they'll also start to question other things that are told by the doom and gloom people whose solution is always the same. I remember I asked somebody once, I said, all right, so you believe climate change is a real problem? Yeah. What if I told you that the best way to protect the environment was actually increase private property rights and less government control over the economy? And it's almost like they refuse to believe it, because, again, the real objective was control over the economy, control over the apparatus of government, and climate change was a useful moral argument for it. All right, last question right here. Nick, I just want to say thank you for climbing for my last question. Andrew Westford. Hey, Andrew. Great. No, thank you very much. So yeah, for those of you who are interested, we do have a whole community over on Circle. I think I got the link in the description here. But I do have one Wesley Smith question. What do you have in your kit behind you? That is a Gold Cup 1911 that belonged to my grandfather. I always loved Colt 1911s. I know that's become cliche, and I don't care. They're awesome. God bless you, Browning. Yeah, so that was special to me. My grandfather and I were very, very close, and so to be able to have his Colt 1911 was important to me. All right, guys, I think that's all I got for right now. I'm about to lose my voice. Once again, thank you very much for joining. Listen, if you found this valuable, I hope you did. That's kind of what I wanted. I wanted everyone to give one kind of a postmortem on the election and talk a little bit more about the overall state of the country. And to the extent that you found my commentary useful, again, I appreciate it. But thank you guys very much, and we'll see you next time.